Hey everybody, welcome to the Transfer of Learning video. Apologies again for this afternoon with our technological issues we had over in the lab, but hopefully this will be an okay alternative. We didn't miss a whole lot. All we're going to talk about today is transfer of learning, and then I'll make another video that will walk you through our transfer of learning lab as well. And then I'll have a third video also to show you how to use the tool that I made for you for your 8.2 lab. Um, you'll want to use that to calculate your constant error and your variable error as it'll not only calculate those things for you by just putting in your raw data from your lab, but it'll also build some graphs for you that'll help you to answer some of those questions. So make sure you guys are using that little data tool that I use in the Excel sheet. And if you have any questions about how that works, please don't hesitate to reach out, and I'm happy to walk you through it. But it's pretty simple to use. You just put your data in the yellow boxes. That's all you need to do. Everything else will calculate on its own. Um, but so switching gears here, transfer of learning, we kind of talked about it a little bit when we talked about retention and transfer tests. So remember when we talk about retention, it's being able to perform that same skill that we had just practiced within the acquisition blocks. And then transfer was a slight variation of that skill. So, being able to transfer knowledge is something that we're testing right there. And so what we mean by transfer of learning is this gain or loss in proficiency on one task as a result of practicing or experience that you have in another task. Some examples up here in these photos are this soccer player dribbling through cones and gaining some proficiency through dribbling through these cones, and then trying to transfer that over into the game situation where he has to dribble around a defender. Another type of transfer here could be, this transfer between tackling in rugby and tackling in football. You can see these skills are really similar. There's a couple of marked differences. If you look at the rugby player, you notice that his head is behind the ball carrier, which is typical of a rugby tackle. Whereas in football, because we wear helmets, football players are taught to, you know, tackle with their head in front of the player or stick their head into their chest. Um, this causes some issues, right? This is, a lot of football teams are actually starting to start teaching more of a rugby style tackle because it's a little bit safer on the head. You don't get as many, as big of jar to the head like you do in football. And you'll see teams, if anybody's a fan of the Seahawks, I know I'm a big Seahawks fan, but they always talk about hawk tackling, and what they mean by hawk tackling is this rugby style tackle. But you can see that, you know, there's some elements here that could transfer over. I would imagine that a rugby player would be able to come over in football and be able to tackle and vice versa. Those things would probably transfer over pretty well. So the things we want to know about transferring is there's three different types of transfer. And if we were meeting in class, we would look at this. And if you guys want to pause the video here and take a look here, you're welcome to identify some of the things that would be, similar or different between these two sets of skills, right? So we have like bowling and croquet, canoeing and biking here, water skiing and downhill snow skiing, and ballroom dance and ballet, all these different things. A good example that we'll look at a little bit later is between tennis and squash or tennis and racquetball. You would think that these skills would transfer over really well because they're both racket sports in which you're striking a ball, but they're a little bit fundamentally different that makes it actually difficult to transfer those things over, and we get actually what's known as a negative transfer, where um, some experience in one skill, namely experience in racquetball or squash, kind of inhibits your ability to be able to succeed in hitting a tennis ball, because in racquetball and squash you hit the ball straight, whereas in tennis you hit the ball with topspin, and so there's a little bit of a negative impact there. It's pretty easily overcome though, and it doesn't go the other way. Tennis players typically can go into racquetball and figure it out pretty quick. Um, but yeah, lots of similarities, lots of differences. Again, feel free to pause this here and kind of go through and make some different observations on your own between these different things. Um, the elements of transfer that we want to focus on here, there's kind of three different elements of transfer, and then there's three types of transfer we're going to talk about as well. So the three elements of transfer are the elements relating to how things can transfer. So they can either transfer as similar movements, as similar perceptual elements, or similar conceptual elements. When we think, usually when we think about transfer, we think mostly about movement elements. So these fundamental movement patterns. So take for example this soccer kicker and this football kicker. The movements of doing those two things are really very similar. And in fact, if you go to college football or the NFL, you'll notice that a lot of the college and NFL kickers are former soccer players. That's because the movement elements of that transfers over really well. Other different elements can be things that are perceptual elements or aspects requiring like the processing information. This could be, visual tracking of the ball here, like we see between the softball player or this football player. It could be, different things like judging, a target location or interpretation of, opponent's movements, like we would see between, ice hockey and soccer, right? With similar movements happening, and we can anticipate the perception of opponents' movements within the sport, right? And then the last thing is conceptual elements, and these are things like rules, principles, guidelines, and strategies. A lot of things resulting or relating to like spacing on the floor. So, for example, here we have team handball and hockey. They're played on a similar size court with similar dimensions and similar goals, but they're very different sports, right? But there's some different spacing issues that that would transfer over really well, right? So when we space the floor in handball um, in order to move the ball around and stretch the defense, they do similar things in hockey. So you can see that in lots of different things. If anybody has ever seen or played hockey and then either seen or played indoor soccer, there's a lot of similar spacing stuff there as well, as the indoor soccer and the hockey are basically the same arena they're playing on. They're just doing a couple of different things, playing soccer instead of ice hockey, right? Um, Other conceptual elements can be like variation in shot selection between like tennis and badminton, or like maintaining proper spacing again between ice hockey and soccer, like we did with the indoor there. So again, movement elements, perceptual elements, and conceptual elements are things we want to think about when we think about transferring things over. The reason why this is important as we get to our applied thing is, being coaches or movement practitioners, we want to think about how can we transfer what we do in practice into performance in a game situation. So it's a huge part of what we do, right? There's three types of different transfer. We have what's called as near transfer, and near transfer would be transferring skills from one task or situation that's real similar to another task or situation. So like here, like shooting a free throw in practice and shooting a free throw in the game. These two things are essentially the same thing, just in a slightly different context, right? And slightly in a lot more different expectations as well here. So near transfer again is one task or situation that's very similar to another task or situation. We could look back at our tackling here too. This would be near transfer, going from a rugby tackle to a football tackle. That would be a near transfer. This here would also be a near transfer, right? Dribbling between cones, dribbling between defenders. Another thing is far transfer. Far transfer is transferring from one task or situation that's very different. This is what we think about a lot of times when we do things like in the weight room in strength training, and transferring that over into a sport. So example, this upper body strength training that this guy's doing over here, and then transferring that strength and that technique over here into being a lineman in football. And the closer you can get these, the better it transfers over. So you'll notice if you ever in like a big football weight room, they'll have setups for pushing weight that is a lot closer simulation to actually like pushing another player like you would when you block them. So far transfer, a task or situation that's very different, but those elements can transfer over. This last one is what's known as negative transfer, and this is kind of what we talked about with the squash and racquetball players and with tennis. And what happens in negative transfer is that knowledge of a previous skill can be detrimental to learning a new skill or performing a new skill. So like if you play a lot of racquetball, you get real used to hitting the ball nice and straight. But in tennis, hitting the ball straight is not going to be successful. You're going to either hit it right into the net or you're going to hit it off the court. So with tennis, you have to hit the ball with topspin. and which you don't have to do in racquetball. So there's a little bit of negative transfer between the racquetball and the tennis. Another real classic example is between like golf and baseball. If you have somebody that's doing a lot of golfing and then have them come out and try to learn how to, hit a baseball that's thrown to them, they're going to struggle at first because those movements have some fundamental patterns that are similar, but there's also some fundamental patterns that are way different as well, and they kind of interfere with each other for being able to transfer that over. So again, three different elements of transfer and three different types of transfer. Again, these are things we want to think about as we move forward. Our final project that we're going to do in this class is we're going to build a practice plan. And so while we're building this practice plan, you're going to want to think about, how am I going to transfer the things that we do in practice? How is that going to transfer over into the game? Other things you want to think about also is, I have this group of athletes. How can I take what they've learned in their life and playing other sports and doing other things and transfer that into what we're trying to do here to make them as successful as they can be individually, and because if they can be successful as individuals, we're going to be able to buy into that strength as a team as well, to be able to take everybody's strengths and pull it together to perform as a team. So that's all we've got for today. Please see the Excel sheet that I gave to you for 8.2 for doing your CEs, VEs, and your graphs. And then lab 8.3, I made a video for you that as well. 8.3 has to do with transfer of learning. So you're going to be having one participant just performing a skill, and then we're going to have a second participant perform a preliminary task to see if that preliminary task transfers over when they go to produce the same skill that the first group did. All right. If you have any questions about any of these things, please let me know. I've made a video here for lab 8.3. Again, I mentioned in the video for the lab 8.3, it's going to say lab 7.2. That's because this lab came from an older edition of the textbook. So although it does say chapter 7.2, it is lab 8.3. And then in the discussion, it's going to ask you to discuss, what you found in chapter 7. What we mean is what we found in chapter 8 with regard to transfer of learning. All right, so if you guys run into any problems or have any questions or anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. And it was good to see some of you guys that came into the lab today. I enjoyed getting to know some of you guys, and it was great to be able to use the lab a little bit. And I'm going to be sending out a Google kind of poll to see if that's something that we want to do in the future. If we want to have some open time in the lab where you guys can come in and do your lab activities, I'd be happy to come open it for you. And then also to see kind of what time works best for everybody. So if we can, get a time that works really well for a bunch of people, I'll open it during the time where we have the most availability. And yeah, hopefully we can take advantage of that. If we do end up doing that and you guys can't make it for that time for any reason, feel free to reach out to me as well, and I'm happy to meet you out there to work on the lab as well if we want to do that individually. I'm open to doing that as well. So whatever I need to do to help you guys succeed is what I'm here for. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out, and good luck with the rest of chapter 8. And again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. All right, we'll talk to you later. Bye.